Please consider becoming a patron of MythVision Podcast. You'll get early access to every video, including this amazing one, and you can ask me personal questions, private message me, anything you'd like. We are MythVision. Welcome back to MythVision Podcast. We're going to talk about the Table of Nations. We're talking to Russell Gmirkin right now. Berossus in Genesis, Manetho in Exodus is the book. See the description for more details. This right now obviously is going to take us into a next chapter of the book. And I wanted to take us slowly through this as much as possible because it's a lot of material to cover. Dating of the Pentateuch, or even the Hebrew Bible, is a very, very difficult process. It's not easy. It takes a lot of reading far and wide and detective skills, so to speak, to try and pick up on, are there fingerprints that, we can see that give us implications on dating some of these ideas. Today's episode is going to be on the Table of Nations, Russell, but I think it'll be interesting also to poke at a theological theme, I think, in this notion of the Table of Nations. Obviously, you would, in your chapter, you push things way into the 273 BCE Hellenistic era under Ptolemy Soter the first, if I'm not mistaken, somewhere in this time range, approximately. But the point is, you're trying to date this. And when I'm reading it, I'm at the same time looking at what you're dating. I'm thinking, okay, what are the theological implications of making all these descendants come from Noah and then claiming out of all of those descendants, God chose this one guy, Abraham, technically when you get to the next chapter, he chooses one guy named Abraham, and then he immediately off the gates like, hey, I'm going to bless all the nations through you, okay? In you, all the nations will be blessed. What's going on? Anyway, Table of Nations, Shem, Ham, and was it
Japheth? And Japheth.
Japheth. So these three, if I could use the term, patriarchs of nations, tell us, what is the Table of Nations in Genesis 10 and what's going on?
Well, okay, first off, in terms of the story background, Noah survives the flood in the ark with his 3 sons and their wives and probably some children. And the names of the sons are Shem, Ham, and Japheth. And in the Table of Nations, they talk about their 70 descendants, each of which was the ancestor of their own nation.
Right.
Ham was the ancestor of the Egyptians, and Javan was the ancestor of the Ionians or Greeks. So each nation had their own ancestor, what's called an eponymous ancestor. It's where the whole nation or ethnic group is named after one alleged ancestor. Now, as Van Cedars pointed out as early as 1992, this is a very Greek sort of a thing.
John Van Cedar?
John Van Cedar.
I got him right here.
Yeah, very good. So he devoted several pages to this topic, how the Greeks, they had eponymous ancestors to the various nations that they had. For instance, how the Greeks, the Hellenes, they were descended from Hellas, or the Medians were, which is kind of a Persian people. The Persians were descended from Perseus, the Medians from Media, and so on and so forth. Every nation had an ancestor that, by coincidence, had that same name. And you have the same thing going on with the Table of Nations, which shows the Greek influence, I would say a late Greek influence. John Van Cedar sees all of this happening, 500 BC or whatever, before the Jews really had contact with the Greeks. But I see all of this happening in the Hellenistic era after Alexander the Great conquered the East and ruled Judea, and all sorts of Greek influences were present in throughout the East. So it is a Greek sort of a phenomenon. And in my book, Berossus and Genesis, I was mainly looking at the Table of Nations for its chronological clues as to when this table could have been constructed, because there's three different groups of nations. There's a bunch of descendants of Shem, which were basically grouped around Mesopotamia, and then the descendants of Ham were basically grouped around Egypt and Ethiopia, Arabia, North Africa. And then the Japhethites were like all around Asia Minor and the Greek world. And so they divided the world into three parts. And I wondered, when did those three groups exist naturally? When were they in existence as political alliances, or, and if you can find out when that took place, then you can date when the Table of Nations was.
You bring up an interesting note. I'll be honest, I did not go like deep into trying to look up the things that you're talking about because it's complex, but you mentioned something like one of the sons curse, if I'm not mistaken. We know Canaan obviously has a bad curse, but one of the three main, Ham, I think it was cursed, if I'm not mistaken.
Ham's son, Canaan, was cursed.
Okay,
because Canaan looked upon Noah's nakedness, which is all very euphemistic. But because of this, God placed him under a curse to be forever in servitude.
Yeah, so that whole, you mention this and you say, only during this time do these political entities are the two ruling over the one, so to speak. And you think that it's somehow evidence to say, look at this timing in which this is happening, this might fit the bill. But I guess today, it'll be interesting to hear your take showing as we speak, like what you're discussing here, how this might be Hellenistic. I'm also interested in going like, what do you think the point was? Like, why do you think they wrote it? Obviously, this is not literally true, that these guys descend from this guy. And like, this is not an accurate, real genealogy of really what happened to these nations. But it seems like it does have a political influence biblically on trying to say to the readers of this book or books, to say, look, all these nations, we're all related in some sense. We're all connected to each other. They are the other nations, but in some way we're connected in this known region of the world, this known world that we're part of. And I kind of wanted you to maybe comment on some of that stuff, if you didn't mind.
Sure. Well, as far as the reason why they have the Table of Nations, part of it has to do with the Greek literary genre that is found in Genesis 1 through 11, which biblical scholars call the primordial history. Mm-hmm. It's basically the history of the pre-flood world, from the creation in Genesis 1 through the flood, and then the immediate afterworld when you have these nations arise. Well, there was a genre of literature among the Greek philosophers. It was called Berossus, which means about physics or about nature. And it's trying to figure out how the present world came to exist. And part of that exploration by the natural philosophers was cosmogony. How did the universe originate?
Right.
And a lot of them thought started out in chaos. Some divine intelligence appeared that imposed some order on things, and then you got the stars in the sky and the earth and all of that stuff. And then another aspect of this was they wanted to figure out the origins of humans. So they had stories about where the first humans came from and other life forms. Another part of that was what you could call a polygony or sociogeny, the origins of society, the origins of civilization. Where did inventions come from? And where did the nations come from? How did our nations today, how did they originate? And some of these philosophers, they came up with theories of migrations, how the different peoples came to where they are today, the different language groups. Hecataeus of Miletus, he created the first map of the world to assign where all the different nations were located. And so this Greek interest in their origins created this whole type of literature that explored ideologies and the origin of inventions, where did agriculture come from, and everything. They were curious about what are the causes of our present world. And part of that was organizing the nations into kind of genealogies and figuring out how they got to where they were today, their known world. So I think that part of the motivation for the Table of Nations was that the people who wrote the first 11 chapters of Genesis, they read a lot of Greek philosophy and a lot of studies and speculations about how the present world came to exist. And as part of that reading, they saw some of the Greek philosophers who kind of cataloged the nations and tried to explain societal institutions. And they imitated that. They were trying to compete with Greek literature. They were trying to do everything that the Greeks did, and the Babylonians and the Egyptians. So there was a competition going on. And I think the Table of Nations was part of that.
One of the things that is like a recent discussion I've been having on this topic, if you will, what role do the nations play in the biblical scheme? It's obvious that the authors are writing from an Israelite point of view, and that the nations kind of play like a backup character, so to speak, in this narrative, because it's from the Israelite view. But do you see any of the literature biblically tapping into the Table of Nations concept? What I mean to say is, are there any books throughout the Old Testament that seem to hark back at this Table of Nations and say, you remember the dividing of the nations? We're not always going to be divided. One day the nations that were divided and allotted their own gods will come in and see that our God is true. Do you see that as playing into the Table of Nations scheme in any way? They're harping at this idea that when the Tower of Babel and the split took place, the reason why we're all separated is different tribes and tongues and blah, blah, blah. We're really all one family, but one day they'll come back and realize the truth. Do you see anything like that?
Well, yes. And it's a little bit complicated because there are more than one groups of authors that utilize the Table of Nations. For instance, I'm going to skip forward ahead to the Enoch literature.
Please.
The Enoch literature in a couple places refer to the 70 angels who were over the 70 nations. So now the Table of Nations has 70 figures and 70 nations. So the Jews and the authors of the Enoch literature, they realize that there are 70 biblical nations. And each one of them in the Enoch literature had their own angel. Now, if you go to Deuteronomy 32, verses 8 through 9, each one of the nations had their own god. In fact, I'm going to read that passage.
Please.
It's very controversial. And when I say controversial, it was controversial in ancient times. The reading says, when Elyon, which is the Hebrew word meaning the Most High God, gave the nations their inheritance, when he separated humanity, he fixed the boundaries of the peoples according to the number of sons of God. And for Yahweh's portion is his people, and Jacob is his allotted heritage. So in this two verses, Elyon, who is the highest God, he has the sons of God, who you also see in Genesis 6, verses 1 through 4. God has a lot of sons and daughters running around. He has offspring. And each one of these 70 offspring have, each of them have their own nation and people. Now, this goes clear back to the literature of Ugarit, the Baal cycle, the Baal epic, where the supreme god, who is El, he has 70 sons and daughters by one of his consorts. Might be more than one, but yeah, anyway. So the idea of the 70 sons of El, that goes clear back to the ancient Canaanite religion. Now, Elyon, that's the highest god. El is just, it kind of became synonymous with God. Really, El was a Canaanite, what we would say today, a pagan god. Certainly different from Yahweh. And he has 70 sons and daughters. And evidently, one of those sons was Yahweh. Yahweh was a lesser god, a minor god, one of the kids. Probably a middle child, I would say. And you know how messed up middle children can be. So, and you have that in Genesis 1 through 11. You have a supreme God, the God of creation, the God who created the world in 6 days. And then you have the sons of God, these lesser gods who are down on earth. Some of them think some of the daughters of men are pretty hot. So they have marriages and they have offspring that are giants. And these are all these lesser terrestrial gods, of which Yahweh is one. Yahweh makes his first appearance not in chapter 1, which has the supreme God. He appears in chapters 2 and 3, where he's this kind of minor God who's living in Eden. He doesn't really know everything that's going on. Adam, well, what are you hiding for? What happened here? Cain, where's your brother? He's not omnipotent. He's not omniscient. He's localized in this land, this one land on earth. And there are undoubtedly other gods and other lands all around earth. He just has one little corner of it. So you have a picture where Yahweh is one of the 70 sons of God. Now this was controversial, including in the reference in Deuteronomy, because the Masoretic text, it changes it from the sons of God, which has very good textual witnesses. They change it into the sons of Israel. And then I think there's another text that has the sons of Adam. And all scholars recognize these are people who are modifying the original, which is way too controversial. And they're making it sons of somebody else, not the supreme God, El Elyon.
Have you looked at the sorry, I got to echo. Looked at the other source in Deuteronomy 32:43. Have you seen that discrepancy as well? That's in the Dead Sea Scroll, Qumran.
Right. The sons of God also appears in verse 43.
Yeah, I can pull up a really cool image my friend Steven actually produced.
Yeah.
If you don't mind.
Please do.
Yeah, this is a really, I think he did a really good job on this. So give him a pat on the back, ladies and gentlemen. And this is the image here. I'm going to make it full screen if I can. Let's see if that even matters. It doesn't really matter. Same size. So anyway, you got the exact point up top, 32:8, where he talks about sons of Israel in the Masoretic here. And it says sons of God in the Dead Sea Scrolls as well as the Septuagint. It might say angels of God or sons of God, either way.
Right.
But in the Deuteronomy 32:43, rejoice, O nations, with his people, for he'll avenge. It's all human. Like, this is not divine. But then when you get into the Dead Sea Scrolls, he doesn't say rejoice, O nations, with his people. He says, rejoice, O heavens, with him, and let all the sons of God worship him. What the heck is going on here? For he'll avenge the blood of his sons. What? Like, what is this? You know, this is a Dead Sea Scroll, Deuteronomy. You know?
Right. Well, in Ugaritic texts, El is pretty much equated with the heavens. Sometimes, as I recall, they're used in parallel. Yeah, it's talking about multiple sons of God.
Right.
And this recognizes it here in Deuteronomy. There's in the Psalms, you have, I forget which Psalm, I think probably Psalm 82.
I could look it up.
You have a divine council, which is in the Baal epic. El had a divine council of his 70 sons. And so you have this divine council in heaven, and
you're right, Psalm 82.
And the gods in this divine council, they were portrayed as mortal. One of the gods was going to die, and be overthrown by another god. And you have other traditions where, in some biblical traditions, El Elyon is the father of Yahweh. In others, Yahweh has been promoted to the chief of the divine council.
Right.
So
like Marduk.
Yeah. So it's all very controversial. I think what's going on is, in Genesis, you have a very consistent picture where you have El Elyon in Genesis 14, who is also the Elohim of chapter 1, the supreme God, the creator of heavens and earth. He is in his own category. And then you have these different sons of God, including this minor god Yahweh, who was just over Israel. And all the gods get along in Genesis. All the nations get along in Genesis. But once you get to Exodus through Joshua, the officials in charge of the Yahweh cult, they didn't like that because their god had been demoted. He was kind of a second-rate god underneath the creator God. So in the Ten Commandments and elsewhere, they identify the two. They say Yahweh is Elohim, is El Elyon, that all of these are different names for the same God. They conflated. And that was their way of making Yahweh their local God, the top God of the whole universe.
Right.
Now in Genesis, this local God Yahweh, he walks around Abraham sees him with his companions coming from the distance. Sarah slaughters a lamb and they have dinner together, have a conversation. For the cosmic God creator of the universe, doesn't quite seem appropriate. But then in Exodus through Joshua, Yahweh has given all these cosmic aspects. All of a sudden, you can't look on the face of Yahweh without being destroyed. And he's a fire. He's a fiery creature. He's a fire inside the tabernacle. They take over all these cosmic elements and assign them to Yahweh in Exodus through Joshua. So you have two different sets of authors that are kind of competing. They have competing views, and Genesis lost miserably. In the later books, Yahweh kicks the butt, every divine butt of every other god. He's at war with all of them. They're not all equals. They don't play nice. Yahweh's the only good one, and everyone else should be destroyed. Mm-hmm. And then later on, you get monotheism, where they say these other gods, they're not just wicked, they're not just evil, they're not even real. So you have this progression where the Yahweh cult in Jerusalem or Mount Gerizim, they want a monopoly on the whole God business. And this monopolistic tendency makes polytheism bad. All the 70 gods of the nations, they're all terrible. There's only one God worth worshiping, and eventually there's only one God, and then we have monotheism. And look at where we are with all our monotheistic religions at war with each other. The benevolent polytheism of Genesis, which actually comes from Plato, but that's a long story. This benevolent polytheism where you're nice to all the other gods and you respect other peoples and you want peace and harmony. I think that was much better than what we have today or back then.
So I think it's important to say that there are source material here with various ideas about God. And obviously, they're probably bringing in different traditions about how they view and understand God. Deuteronomy is different than Leviticus. Leviticus would be different than, say, Genesis. Genesis is, it's documentary hypothesis stuff. The difference between you and them would be dating and where you place the source material. You're not in disagreement ultimately on the idea of source material and the documentary hypothesis, as in like the compilation of text and redactors trying to fuse concepts and whatnot. You're 100% in line with scholarship on that. The difference between you and them is one is trying to argue P, for example, I think it's P, as 900 BC, and you're going, let's try Hellenistic age. And so your dating is totally different. That doesn't mean, and I want to say this so no one gets, I don't want to poison the well because someone might go, that's totally in disagreement with these guys. You're also a little more complicated than that because it sounds like, you're putting everything as if it was all written and it all came into existence at 300s BC or 273. But really what you're suggesting is the compilation of a lot of this literature. Some of it may have been created during this time. Some of it might be much older. But the idea that the composition takes place of lots of this literature and that there's a unified, here is our legal code, here is our book, this is what we have, is what happens by 273 BC, according to you, approximately, give or take, a decade or so. So that's what I want everyone to know. Back to the Table of the Nations. This was important to get the backdrop. These Cain, Ham, Shem, Japheth, and all their descendants. There's 3 patriarch figures, and they all have descendants who are patriarch figures of multiple descendants, and on and on and on we go. They all get different gods. Now, what you mentioned earlier, the geographic location, one seems to be more Greek along the coastlands, hints of more of a Greco-Roman Philistine, if I could use the term, as Greeks, and then others seem to be more of the Egyptian and Afro the African regions and theirs. And then, of course, you have a different region. These three patriarchs seem to be the geographical centrality for each of these three groups. And within the subheads of those, you have different parties in those categories, so to speak. Am I on the right track here?
Yeah. Now, I have multiple lines of evidence that point to the Pentateuch being written around 270 BC, 273, 272 BC, somewhere through that. Now, at that time, in that region, Alexander the Great, he conquered the East between like 335 to 325 BC. And then he died of probably malaria in Babylon. And then his generals all fought over the scraps of the empire. And those fights went on for decades. But at the time that I say that the Pentateuch was finally written down, maybe drawing on some older oral traditions, but this is when it was written down. Mm-hmm. There were two major kingdoms. In the north, there were the Seleucids, who were centered at Babylon, their capital moved around, let's say Mesopotamia and northern Syria. And in the south, there was the Ptolemaic Empire, which was Ptolemy the First Soter, and then Ptolemy the Second Philadelphus, who created the great Library of Alexandria. So in Daniel, you have the king of the north, which is the Seleucids, and the king of the south, which is the Ptolemies, because those were the two major kingdoms. Well, in the Table of Nations, two of the groups of nations correspond very well with the Seleucids and the Ptolemies. The sons of Shem are very closely, most of them are in Mesopotamia. There's Asher, which is obviously Assyria. There's Aram, which is the people of Mesopotamia and northern Syria. There's Elam, which is the Elamite mountains adjacent to Babylon, and others. Now, there was also Lud, who is the son of Shem. He's kind of an outlier because Lud refers to the Lydians. And the Lydians were not in Mesopotamia. They were in Asia Minor, which is modern Turkey. You have Greece, you have the Aegean Ocean or Sea, and then you have Turkey or Asia Minor. And Lydia, or Lud, was the major kingdom of Asia Minor, which is not Mesopotamia. It's its own thing. So if you look at the history of Lydia, there were only a couple periods where Lydia was linked to Mesopotamia. And one of them was like 3 years from 315 to 312 BC under Antigonus, who was one of these warring generals. That didn't last long. But the main thing is after 278 BC, Lydia was very firmly in the Seleucid Empire. So Lydia plus all these Mesopotamian kingdoms, that's the Seleucids after 278 BC. And that's a very strong dating clue. Now, the sons of Ham, there's Put, which is northern Africa. There's Cush, which is the Ethiopians. There's Ham, which is a synonym for Egypt. And another one of them was referred to Arabia. And these were all within the Ptolemaic Empire. And actually under Ptolemy II Philadelphus, his propaganda really exaggerated his rule over Ethiopia and Arabia. Right. His official poet, Theocritus, he said that Ptolemy ruled with a spear over all of these lands. This is not exactly historically true, but that's what they claimed in 273 BC specifically. So there's a very good indication of date with the descendants of Ham. And the third one, which is Japheth, those sons and listed there, they go from the Caucasus in the northern part of Asia Minor and kind of around the coast in Cilicia and Javan are the Isles of the Greeks. And those people in Japheth, they were all known from that period, but they were independent. They weren't in the Ptolemies and they weren't in the Seleucid Empire. So they were like a third group of nations at that time. And it's the only period of time where the world was divided up in those three groups. So it's a very specific, good indicator of date.
So when like Psalms, for example, just to give you one example to get your thoughts on, when Psalms has the author saying that the coastlands will sing praises to your name, or whatever it might be, but the coastlands, it brings up the coastlands. That's not Israel. That's obviously not Israel.
No,
who are they talking about? Who are they saying, hey, sing praises to the God of Israel?
Well, the coastlands, there were two people at that time who were maritime people. The Greeks, they traded with their boats all over the Mediterranean. They had colonies, Rome, Spain, the Black Sea. They had emporiums all down the coast of Israel, clear to the Nile. The Phoenicians were their competition, and they were based on the coast, kind of around Tyre and Sidon, and but they were coasts that were adjoining Israelite territory. So when you talk about the coast, you're talking about Greeks and Phoenicians, and maybe a few Philistines too, because they wound up a little further south on the coast.
Yeah.
And when they're singing the praises of Israel, these are kind of Mediterranean seafaring cosmopolitan peoples who represent the whole Mediterranean world, really. And they're singing the praises of Israel because Israel is the highest of the nations. They're a light to the world. Their law is an example that illuminates, all the nations with their wisdom and sophistication and goodness. So, so Israel and the Jews were supposed to be elevated to become the most wonderful of the nations with a great reputation throughout the world.
So let me ask you this: these nations that are playing a role in the table of nations, I guess would be my final point, because I really look. I want to go into detail, right? But I also don't want to go through every single thing that you talk about in this book. I think it's important that they go and read. They need to read this and see how interesting it is when you break down each of these and say, I think there's something going on later here.
Yeah, you can drill down as deep as you want to. There's so many footnotes, and you can get as deep as you want. It's better to have an overview. I agree.
Right. And I like the airplane views. It gives them enough appetizer to feed them for a full course meal that they're interested in going and reading. But I want to bring up something I keep harping back to, is later authors using this early mythological history of these genealogical descendants. And out of all of these, let me pull up my Genesis 10 here. It's obvious he goes through mentioning everything from Nineveh, Hamathites, eventually the families of Canaanites, and extended Canaan and Sidon and Gerar and Sodom and Gomorrah. And I mean, like, you go on and on. The list is there in Genesis 10. Finally, it says These are the sons of Shem according to their families, according to their languages, by their lands, and according to their nations, which is indication gods attach themselves not only to the land, but they also attach themselves to the people, the blood. So there's oftentimes that. It's cosmopolitan ideas that start to, Hellenism says, okay, all of these divided nations, you start to really get kind of a syncretism, if you will, like overlap of ideas, and we can all kind of get along. And especially when people start to enter the Jewish, or if you will, Israel's God. These are the families of the son of Noah, verse 32, the final verse. According to their genealogies, by their nations, from these the nations spread over the earth after the flood. These are not just Israelites. I want anyone to know that, because when you read in Deuteronomy 32, there seems to be this extremely controversial point that you brought up earlier. It doesn't say sons of God. It says the 70 nations according to the sons of Israel.
Yeah.
So there are groups of people who see that and say it's all about Israelites only, and they don't even see that the nations are not Israelites. There's other nations, other gods, and there are a lot of these other gods, or the gods accept them as their inheritance, but Israel becomes Yahweh's. And then what we have in the next chapter says they had a common vocabulary. Then it gets into the myth of the Babylonian, now we're speaking in different tongues, and they're trying to reach the heavens. So Babel gets dropped, right? And I believe I'm right here. I believe so. So then it goes on all the way down to Abraham.
I want to interject something
Please.
into the Babel story.
Yeah, please.
It's very interesting. And the Lord said, "Behold, the people is one, and they have all one language, and this they begin to do. And now nothing will be restrained from them, which they have imagined to do. So let us go down and confound their language." This is gods in the plural again. It's not just one God coming down and scattering the people. There are multiple sons of God before the flood, and then the Tower of Babel story, you have multiple gods after the flood. And they scattered the nations. And the gods, evidently, they scatter with them because they have to go along with each with their little nation. But do continue on to Abraham.
No, great point. In fact, I love that you connected that, because it's obvious to me that clearly shows common source. This seems to be a common source when we talk about J, E, D, and P. This is obviously from a similar author with a similar idea of God, in my opinion. I could be wrong, but it sounds very similar. And what they do, the redactor, whoever this is connecting this whole Babel and the nations, the table of nations, to Abraham. I mean, if you keep going, he says, so the Lord scattered them, and talks about how many years certain person lived, and then begat so-and-so, and begat so-and-so, and they lived but all the way down to Abram. Haran died in the land of his birth in Ur of Chaldees while his father Terah was still alive, and Abram and Nahor took wives for themselves. The name of Abram's wife was Sarah, and the name of Nahor's wife was Milcah. She was the daughter of Haran, the father of both Milcah and Iscah. But Sarah was barren. She had no children. So it's already giving you this hint in Genesis 11 about him being a father. He's going to end up becoming a father. It's trying to say, get ready. Don't worry. God's going to bless this chosen man from all these people, from among all the nations. This is going to be the chosen nation. Through one man, I'll make you a father of many nations, the patriarchal blessing. But I say that to say, as soon as you get to Genesis 12, right, still harping on Abram, and he goes on to say, I will make you into a great nation, singular, one, not nations, one nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great so that you will exemplify divine blessing. I will bless those who bless you, but the one who treats you lightly I must curse. And all the families of the earth will bless one another by your name. Now, this is my question. This goes into the foundations of how you're going to approach a lot of the material throughout the Bible, I think. And if we get this wrong, it's easy to see possibilities of getting other things wrong. It sounds like the families of the earth, hint, hint, table of nations. Okay. This is not just Israelites. This is a bigger picture here. It's, and they are claiming none of us, I don't believe this. I don't actually believe this ontologically, or I don't have a epistemological basis for believing in this. I'm saying the text seems to indicate the authors are hoping, they're predicting that all these nations, Shem, Ham, and Japheth's descendants, all these different peoples all over, will one day they will bless the Lord, or they will say the families of the earth will bless one another by your name. And he also gives that idea: bless those who bless you, curse those who curse you. What does Abraham do, or Abram do? Goes down to Egypt. The Pharaoh sees his hot sister. Bang, bang, doink, doink. Oh, crap. That was your sister? Oh, why did you do this to me? Curse those who curse you. Right. You're already starting to see when people who aren't you are cursing you, you get cursed, and then blessings. My point is, it seems common sense to you, but there's certain people that I engage that I think don't use that kind of mentality. You know?
Yeah, that's true. And throughout Genesis, there are various misunderstandings that take place. This episode with Abraham and his wife, Sarai, it's kind of repeated with the Philistine Abimelech, too. It's kind of a doublet. But in some of the extra biblical literature, God curses Pharaoh or whoever in such a way that they can't actually have intercourse. So her virtue is protected. But other than these little novelistic misunderstandings, which are all very entertaining, the relationships in Genesis between the nations are pretty easygoing. Abraham rescues not only Lot from this. There's this one invasion from Mesopotamia where some of these kings, they transgress their national boundaries. And yes, that is a bad thing, because Genesis says all the nations should stay put in their allotted territories. The four kings from Mesopotamia, they come down, they conquer Sodom and Gomorrah, they take a bunch of captives. Abraham rescues them. He doesn't just rescue his nephew Lot. He rescues captives and the goods from Sodom and the cities of the plain, because they're on friendly terms. He's on friendly terms with the king of Sodom. They all go to Salem, which might be Jerusalem. It might be a city in Samaria. They all go to Melchizedek, and all of them, Canaanites and Abraham alike, they all worship El Elyon, the highest God, the cosmic God. There's one God, this cosmic God who created the heavens and earth, who's over all the gods of all the nations. And I guess you could say it was ecumenical, all of the nations, they all pay tribute to El Elyon together, elbow to elbow. And it wasn't this rivalry that you later see in Exodus through Joshua. And in fact, Genesis ends on a very high note with, Abraham and Israel and their sons and Joseph. They're all favored by the Egyptians. This prophecy about the nations of the earth being blessed through Abraham, really this is taking place with Egypt at the end of the book of Genesis, where Joseph is Pharaoh's right-hand man. They're living peaceably together. They're friends. There's not a bit of criticism of the gods of Egypt. Everyone gets along just fine. And then, boom, Exodus 1. A new Pharaoh comes. He's evil. He's genocidal. He does this. He does that. A little bit of a change in tone. So you have these positive international tones or themes that are presented in Genesis, which don't necessarily carry through to the rest of the Pentateuch. But I think some of it's picked up in the prophets and in other parts of the Bible, where a positive future with the nations is envisioned. So the Bible is not consistent. People who think the Bible should interpret the Bible, no. Each book should be interpreted on its own. It's a self-contained unit. You have to look on it on its own terms. You can't interpret the book of Joel using the book of Revelation or whatever, people always do. But this positive view of the potential positive international relations and the Jews or Israel being a light to the nations, that's a theme that gets picked up in some of the later books. And it's not consistent, but, the Bible isn't consistent.
Right.
But you do see that theme picked up in certain areas that you seem to be particularly kind of expert in, or you studied that, I know.
I'm very interested in the topic. Let's put it that way. I'm not an expert, but I would say that I've really been digging into this and I'm interested in knowing more, because when you have opponents who take a different position that you think is radically, completely anti-scholarly, it kind of motivates you. It motivates you to want to really know what is going on. Interesting thing is the opponents aren't Christian. The opponents are people who also, like me, don't believe in the book, right? They're not someone who's like, I have to believe in this and I need it to be true. But I feel like they still have an axe to grind on it, requiring everything to be filtered through an Israelite filter. Non-Israelites could not participate or couldn't actually be part of the covenant or couldn't join or were not envisioned, or Paul's Gentiles or not, and on it goes. And so it's helped me. I know people watching may not, what are you talking about that for? Or whatever. There's some people like that. This has helped me want to know more about what is really happening. It makes me want to read actual books and actually know what is actually being said, because then I can at least filter and say, okay, the Israelite who wrote this was their intention. They have an origin story. They have a Diluvian story. The Diluvian story produces why all the nations are like they are. It's just a myth for why we're not Egyptians, and Egyptians aren't, Assyrians, and Assyrians aren't Babylonians, and the on and on it goes. It's this myth explaining why we all speak different languages. We come from different places. It's not actual history. If you really want to know what really is the truth about these things, there are other studies that actually get closer to the reality of what happened. But in antiquity, I feel like we do a disservice towards religious text. We are anachronistically forcing it should tell the truth, therefore it's a lie if it doesn't say what actually happened. But in antiquity, I think what happens in these religious texts, it's the bozo fundamentalist. I say bozo because I was a fundamentalist, who are extreme about this, who are demanding that this is how the text must be understood and how they must be read, that are forcing this interpretation on these books, which makes people cringe at the Bible. They cringe at these books, and they have a hate toward them because of the people who are practicing such beliefs and the way they force their ways about the books on people. So I say that to say, I want to understand the Bible for what it actually is. I want to value it for its imperfections. I want to say, in antiquity, I think these guys were practicing, I guess you could say, for their own ways of thinking, ancient science. And in 2,000-3,000 years from now, when we think we're scientific, and our great grandkids are looking back going, how Neanderthal-like? You were such knuckleheads. I want them to try and be as have humiliation, humbleness in approaching and saying, Derek Lambert and Russell Gmirkin used the tools they understood the world from at that time. But we've had many breakthroughs since then. And I'm not going to say they're knuckleheads. They were brilliant men in the day they lived in. And so were these men who authored these books. Even if you don't agree with them, I don't agree with them. I would never practice the things that they say or think some of that stuff's okay in the context I live in. So I say all that to say, Russell, I commend you for your book. Berossus in Genesis, Manetho in Exodus is an excellent book for anyone who's excited in this topic and wants to look at very controversial, groundbreaking material saying, is this Greek? At the very least, let me say this, and this is something you would disagree with, but that's okay. I want to say this stuff for our audience. At the very least, let's say you guys want to date it back before 273, 272, right? You want to go back. At the very least, you should say some redactors had to have inserted a Greco-Roman or Greek, if you will, because at that time Rome's not on the scene in terms of this, but a Greek there's something going on by the time it's in its final form by 273. At the very least, you should say, maybe it's not its final form because you still have the Dead Sea Scrolls floating around on their own as well. They're trying to come up with a, let's make sure this is what all people are reading kind of stuff. And the sectarians, there's no helping those knuckleheads. They're out there waiting for the world to end. And I'm just teasing, but they're not cosmopolitan. It doesn't seem so.
Yeah, I agree. In the 20th century, well, from, say, 200 BC through the 20th century, everyone assumed that these biblical writings of the Hebrew Bible were really ancient. And it's really only been since the 1990s that people have even conceived of the notion that some of it could have very late Greek influences. It's a new idea. If you're conservatively rooted in the teachings of your church or your university or wherever you grow up in with all these ideas, you're going to think, oh, all this biblical material is really old. But it's a new thesis that some of it could be Greek. How much of it? Well, we're still working that out, and we're still testing the hypothesis. But there seems to be a lot that's there. I'm not the only person working on Greek influences in the Hebrew Bible. Lots of people are doing different areas, and it's working out. And it's like a scientific hypothesis. You come up with a hypothesis. You say, well, this is a new possibility we haven't considered before. It might have more explanatory capability than the old ideas of the past. Let's check it out. And then you test it and test it and test it against the facts. And if it holds up, then maybe you've really got something. And I think in the 20, 30 years since Neil Peter Lemke first suggested that the Old Testament could be a Hellenistic book, that radical new thesis has been tested and has really stood up. And the older ideas, they are now under severe challenge. And I don't think they're going to survive intact, although the older generation will always hold on to their older ideas until they retire. So it's always going to be controversial until that generation dies out. But the idea of Greek influences is it's out there, it's being tested, people are working on it, and it seems to be holding up pretty well. Certainly something worth considering, and everyone should consider evidence and not just their beliefs. Beliefs come and go, but the evidence is what's really important.
Ladies and gentlemen, Russell Gmirkin. Get his book if you can afford it. I know it's an arm and a leg, which is why we're producing the series about the book, but maybe one day you can, and I hope you will. Thank you so much, Russell. Let's do this again. Is there anything you'd like to say before we go?
Just this is a great show. I really enjoyed it. And that's terrific that you've spent so much time on this one kind of groundbreaking book of mine. It's a good service to your viewers. I've had people compliment the series from Europe and Africa and everywhere. They really appreciate the work that you're trying to do to discuss these ideas and bring them to a wider audience.
Well, me and the Divine Council have had our conversation, and let's just put it this way. We also made sure the webcam on your end was working good this time, so that way everybody was pleased with the appearance of Russell Gmirkin, and it wasn't like choppy, because when I edited the last video, I must admit, it took me forever. Almost every single time I turn around, I'm chopping. It came out great, but I cut so much, probably like 5 to 7 minutes of audio I had to cut just to get it to try and work itself out. So, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. If you like what we're doing here, this video is on Patreon early. Of course, you're probably seeing this right now going, I'm already watching on YouTube. Why do I need to join the Patreon? By the time you're watching this, I'm already launching James D. Tabor, an entire video series on Paul and Jesus and the Jesus dynasty. We're already delving into the Talpiot tomb. All of that's on Patreon. So you're over here going, hold on, what am I missing out on? Hundreds of videos that are on the Patreon that helps me do what I'm doing here. One day, I want to fly out there to Oregon and meet Russell in person and interview him. Hopefully your voice will hold up, because that's the only concern I have, and actually get some content with you, Russell, one day in person. So this is a way of supporting making this channel possible to keep educating the general public. Please consider checking us out in the description. Love you, Russell. Let's do this again.
Back at you.
And never forget, the gods even say this chant: we are MythVision.